Let's bring in Nkululeko Tselane, who's a legal director at the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, joining us for a discussion. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. We've just listened to some South Africans speaking about a coalition government, saying that it's the only option that's left. And of course, there is a little bit of concern on the manner in which the coalitions will run, given the history that we've seen, more so looking at the city of Ekurhuleni. What are your thoughts? I mean, the numbers have been counted and the outcome is what we heard this evening.
Good evening, Mpo. Thank you very much for having me. So, first thing that we need to understand is that when we're looking at coalition governments, it was inevitable. It was always going to happen. And the reason is that our electoral system is one of proportional representation. So what that means is that every party, and now with independent candidates, gets seats proportional to the votes that they're going to get. So in South Africa, what's happened is that for a very long time, we've had one dominant party, but that is actually an anomaly. It's not normal to have one dominant party in a proportional representation system. So this was always going to happen. And now the question, and I think now the very, very clear message that voters are sending to all the political parties is that they have to work together. It's highly unlikely that anyone is ever going to get an outright majority again. If it happens, great for them. But what's going to happen now is that this is about a collaboration. And it's also very important to remember that our first government, our very, very first democratic government, was a coalition government. It was a quasi-coalition government. So it wasn't a full coalition government, but it was a government of national unity. So this is what they've given. And then these are now what the electorate and the politicians have to now deal with.
What are some of the legal considerations which one will need to keep a close eye on as we see the parties going into these coalitions, and of course to ensure that they become working partnerships? What are the legal aspects that need to be scrutinized?
Well, so as much as our electoral system is one of proportional representation, which makes sure that there will always be coalition governments, one blind side is that there's really no legal framework to coalition governments. So the first few things that we need to look at is, of course, that there has to be stability. Stability means that there's predictability in who the government is. We've seen in the various councils and municipalities that a motion of no confidence can happen, and then there's a change of leadership, a change of the executive. So that's the first one. The next one, which is the most important one that's coming up, is that after the declaration of the election results, which has happened today, the National Assembly must sit within 14 days. And at its first sitting, it must elect a president and it must elect the speaker. So those are the first things that are going to have to be dealt with in the coming days. And this is also why we say, as much as coalition governments were inevitable, there is a little bit of a problem in that very short time frame. In other countries that we've analyzed, we've looked at Germany, we've looked at the Netherlands, we've looked at Cape Verde, we've looked at Kenya. So in those other countries, they've got a lot more time. In Germany in particular, the last government, if I'm not mistaken, took about 3 months to form, because it's not strictly about ideology. It's about trying to find middle ground and trying to find implementation that they can do, that they can both agree on. So that's a challenge. We've got 14 days. After 14 days, if they have to sit and then they have to elect. If they don't elect, then they have to sit again in 7 days. If once again they're unable to elect, they sit again in 7 days. And if after 30 days they're unable to elect a speaker and a president, then we have to go back to elections. And I think I can speak anecdotally that no one wants to go back to elections.
Yeah.
We want a functional and stable government.
We heard MK leader Jacob Zuma continuing to cast doubt on the IEC and the integrity of the country's election process, and of course, making threats that should this evening's results be announced, that then that in itself would result in a bit of disruption. What do you make of the legal basis that the MK party would put forward if there is consideration on their processes and how they think things were done unfairly?
So in terms of the Electoral Act, there's a number of objections that can be raised. In terms of, there's objections in terms of Section 41, objections in terms of Section 48 and 49. So those objections are objections that have to be dealt with at the voting station with the presiding officer and with the voter and the party agents. Then there's another type of objections. These are Section 55 objections. Those have to be dealt with the Commission. Now, those objections are objections that are material to the outcome of their election results. And mind you, the IEC is not allowed, in terms of the Act, in terms of Section 57, the IEC is not allowed to declare the election results until they've dealt with all of the Section 55 objections. So what that means, it tells us, is that there are no objections which are material to the outcome of the elections. And what does material to the outcome of the elections means? It means that, for example, the chairperson of the Electoral Commission already pointed out that there were a few stations that objections were raised about that have to go back to they have to recounts of those stations. But what material means is that that particular voting station or those voting stations could change the outcome of the election. So we have to make sure that this election is free and fair, which is very important. So that means the accuracy of the vote count is very, very important. But what this means is that even if those 30 voting stations are recounted and the votes completely switch the other way, mathematically, it does not have any impact on the outcome of the elections. So the doubts and the aspersions that are being raised, in my legal opinion, in my humble opinion, are not valid to the outcome of the elections, and that's why they're being dealt with. And also, the Electoral Act says objections do not necessarily halt the end of do not halt the announcement of the results. So we need to look at this in entirety, in its entirety, and we need to understand all of these various ramifications. When are these objections supposed to be launched, and how these objections are then dealt with, and what is the impact of those particular. At all times, there must be evidence of the complaint or the objection that's being raised.
Very well. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion. Nkululeko Tselane, Legal Director at the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, ironing out some of those concerns and the reaction there to the announcement this evening.